Hello and welcome to The Take. I'm your host, Chesley McNeil. Each weekday, we're looking at stories, making headlines, and bringing experts from our community to give their take. Here's a look back at some of the top takes from this week and how those in the know are seeing those stories that impact you. You know, it said there's no place like home, but a new study is showing that it's maybe cheaper to rent that place than to buy it. Bankrate found the national average monthly mortgage payment, including property tax and home insurance, is slightly less than $2,800. That's compared to the national average monthly rent of about $2,000. Looking at the metro area, Metro Atlanta, both figures are lower than the national average, but the cost to rent remains more than $600 a month cheaper than it is to buy. Here to make sense of all those figures is real estate broker Danielle Andrews, who's familiar with the Metro Atlanta market when it comes to buying homes. Danielle, welcome back to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
All right, so give us your take on those numbers. Any of that surprise you at all, those numbers?
No, it doesn't. I mean, when you're looking at national averages, we're taking into account places like California, New York, so that of course is going to skew the numbers. And then just kind of naturally, because renting focuses on the now versus long term, like ownership. So it may be more naturally appealing just by number sense to rent rather than own.
It's a pretty sizable gap, though. Has it always been that way?
No. So of course, it's going to continue to climb, especially in some areas where you see, for example, like a state of New Jersey, where their property taxes are drastically more than in Georgia and Florida or anywhere in the South. And so if you're nationally averaging something, you're going to see a gap that takes us over. And even when we talk about Georgia and the Metro Atlanta area, the gap is much smaller, but it will still continue to rise because renting just always rises.
You know, this is where my son is right now, I got to tell you. And so me and his mom tried to urge him that buying would be better because you're kind of buying to own something rather than renting. Is that what your advice you're giving out, or do you think the renting is smart right now?
Absolutely. I'm always going to advocate for home ownership. I do think the answer is personal and isn't one size fits all. But again, it's an investment towards your future and a return. When you rent, you may get your security deposit back at the end, but you have nothing to show for it other than positive rental history. Whereas that ownership is a monthly deposit into your equity, and it's like a home savings account.
All right, the Atlanta market seems to be expanding at a rapid rate. Looks like a lot of folks are interested in maybe looking at homes. Does this make it easier for you as a broker?
I mean, we still are seeing a very popular and active market in Metro Atlanta and surrounding areas across the country. We're seeing satisfaction and confidence in homeownership go up, feeling a little more stable and not, so fluid when it comes to economic aspects. So yes, the demand is there, and especially in the spring and the summer.
Well, the rates, right? The rates may be dropping, right? Would you advise people to wait for now, maybe rent for a year and then wait for the rates to drop and then buy? What's your advice?
That is so funny. It's always something we're coming across. And I would say you want to buy when it financially makes sense. I wouldn't try to time the market or expect any sort of drastic, especially those pandemic 2% and 3% rates. We've pretty much seen rates stabilize between the 6s to 7s. And so if that's comfortable for you, it's affordable, and it gets you that step forward, take the first step. Don't wait.
So we're not going back down to those 2% and 3% rates?
Let that go. It is definitely a thing of the past. If you didn't strike while it was hot, that opportunity is gone. I'm sorry.
Oh, man. Lastly, real quick, what do you tell buyers that are preparing to buy a home? What should they be doing?
Absolutely. They should be looking at their budget and make a practice of, especially if you're going to increase. If you're paying $2,000 a month for rent and are going to jump to $2,800 in a mortgage, for example, start practicing that now. Set aside that extra $800. Get comfortable with that, because at most it's going to be your new mortgage payment. At next best, it's additional savings that you can have for homeownership emergencies.
Gotcha. All right. Danielle Andrews, thanks so much for joining us and give us that insight. Hopefully my son was watching so he can hear all that great advice you were giving.
Thank you.
It takes a village, Thank you so much. Well, what began as a dream rental for one Smyrna couple quickly spiraled into a struggle for accountability. The couple tells 11Alive their home looked picture perfect until they stepped into the backyard and they found broken glass and buried debris, starting a frustrating process to get it all cleaned up. 11Alive consumer investigative reporter Liza Lucas joins us now. And Liza, you talk about broken glass and stuff buried in the backyard. Sounds like safety issues. Did the landlord respond at all?
Good morning, Chesley. Well, not the way that they had hoped. After initially asking for help, Patrick Colson Price tells me that the property was transferred to one of Metro Atlanta's largest landlords. We're talking about Invitation Homes. Some of you may be familiar if you're watching. And he reached out to us after struggling to get a response from the company. Take a listen.
Someone says they will call me back. No one calls. Emails will go unanswered. I've had to go up to the Invitation Homes offices twice to even get someone to answer a phone call. But, we feel helpless. We feel like, we're paying the rent. We're paying the money.
We want to give you a little glimpse of what we're talking about here. This is the side yard of the home when I visited because we wanted to see it for ourselves. I was also collecting the glass. Every couple of steps you would see it, and every time it rains, Patrick says they just unearth more of them. Now, Patrick also says he would file the work request, but then some of those work orders would get canceled, or vendors would get sent out to the property to check out the job, but then the work would not be completed. This is a pattern, Chesley, that we have been hearing from other residents too. So definitely not isolated.
So it's not an isolated thing here. And you got more people experiencing the same thing?
Exactly. I've been talking to a few families now, and we've been also tracking the data. So as we've been talking to them, we're trying to get a sense of how this maintenance process works. They try to get these maintenance issues fixed, and they repeatedly reach out through the tenant portal for help. Then I also spoke with a local attorney in our story who represents her own clients who've been trying to get answers from Invitation Homes, and she echoed also a lot of what 11Alive has been hearing.
It takes Invitation Homes a long time to respond to their maintenance requests. Clients often have issues with water leaking, whether they have a basement or a foundation. They'll have carpets ruined, flooring ruined. They'll have mold build up because Invitation Homes just takes weeks, sometimes in some cases months to respond or send a repair crew out to look at the problem and to fix the problem. Sometimes they'll send people out to look at it, and then they won't send anybody back to fix it for days and days and days.
So, Liza, is this one of those big companies, those huge companies?
Yes, we're talking about a corporate landlord here. Invitation Homes has huge reach in the metro. They operate more than 12,000 rental properties in the Atlanta area alone. They've been acquiring these single-family homes here in Atlanta for more than a decade, back to 2012. Now, some of those unhappy renters, they have turned to the Federal Trade Commission for help, and data we obtained shows more than 1,000 complaints were filed against Invitation Homes statewide in the last 3 years.
So who's holding them accountable?
Well, there was an FTC settlement, $48 million settlement with the company last fall. You may remember that made a lot of headlines because, again, this company has huge reach, not only in the Atlanta area, but across the country. Now, in our story, the couple's persistence got the attention of code enforcement, and then their complaints triggered a citation. Now, the couple in this case is actually planning to move when their lease is up regardless, but they also wanted to speak out, Chesley, so that the next tenants don't walk into this exact same situation.
Wow. I mean, that's dangerous, especially now. Do they have any pets?
They do, 2 dogs, so you can imagine how scary that is. And one of the little dogs got their paws cut one time.
That makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So the company is now being decided by, you said by who now?
By the city of Smyrna in this particular case, but they've got homes in Mableton and Lawrenceville and Stone Mountain and Roswell and on and on and on. Wow. I'm talking to a DeKalb teacher right now in Stone Mountain who's been trying to get some help. Another family, a tree fell on their property back in February, and they've been going around and around trying to get permits and work done. You know, this is frustrating when you own your own home and sometimes there is a holdup, but when then you're continuing to pay that rent, you expect that communication, and the communication issues really seem to be the core of what these tenants are frustrated about.
Got it. Liza Lucas, thank you for being all over it. We'll be checking back in with you to see if some just due is being done here with this company. Thanks so much. Nurses are unsung heroes in the lifeline of our healthcare system. But right now, they face many challenges, including emotional exhaustion, high workloads, high levels of stress, burnout, and workforce shortages. Here now to explain more behind why this is happening is Brendan Martin. He's the research director at the National Council of State Boards of Nursing. Welcome to the show, Martin.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, let's start off with your take on how is it dire now? Why is it so dire now?
Well, I'd like to begin a little bit with, first there were some positive results coming out of our work. Overall, we did see evidence of a workforce recovery coming out of the emergency phase of the COVID-19 pandemic. And that was largely driven by a rebound among more experienced nurses re-entering the workforce following 2022. But to your point, we did see that many of the same factors that nurses have long identified as the primary drivers of their intent to leave the profession really continue into 2024. So those are understaffing, high workloads, and acute levels of burnout and stress.
Wow. So does your record show any let up since the pandemic? You mentioned the pandemic. Obviously, they were probably overworked then. Has there been any let up since?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So we have seen a reduction by about 8 to 12% in kind of the peak of 2022 of feelings and sentiments of acute levels of burnout and stress. But I don't want to overstate that, because about 4 in 10 nurses, and this is nationwide, so about 40% of all nurses still report acute levels of burnout. And by acute, I mean weekly, if not daily.
How hard is it, Brendan, to bring in new nurses to help fill that void?
So that's one of the windows in which the nursing profession is kind of the envy of all other professions. The intake of new nurses is very, very durable and consistent. So about 150 to 200,000 new nurses enter the workforce in any given year. But what we're seeing in our survey results is that retention is just as vital. Retention of the current workforce that are experiencing many of these kind of emotional highs and lows following the emergency phase of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Nursing can be a little bit niche-y, right? You got different, arms of healthcare, that kind of thing. Where do we see nurses as a whole in 5 years from now?
From our survey, we see about 40% of respondents indicate that they either plan to leave or retire from the profession in the next 5 years, so by 2029. And a little over half of that proportion is due to planned retirement. So in many ways, that gives us a little bit of a pause as we try to determine the sustainability of the bounce or the rebound that we documented in 2024, because while more experienced nurses came off the sidelines since 2022, they're also reporting elevated intent to retire once again in the next 5 years.
So talk to me about what those changes will be, or what you foresee those changes being, as far as whether it's education or just how you bring them in. What will change?
Yeah, this is, I think, we think that this represents kind of a critical inflection point for the nursing profession. We think leaders from across practice, education, regulation, policy, et cetera, really all need to come together to address some of these longstanding issues. Many of these issues, burnout, high workloads, understaffing, et cetera, predated the COVID-19 pandemic. So to really bring to kind of the table durable solutions to address some of these issues, in particular in acute care settings, in direct patient care settings, it's vital that everybody comes together and builds on some of the early momentum that we've seen to date.
Yeah, my wife is a nurse. She runs a clinic. Hard to bring in new nurses that stay. Once they get in, it seems like the job is too hard, maybe physically on some. What would you say to her to help her out?
I'm in the same boat. My wife is a nurse of over 10 years. And we've actually seen in the past 2 years, 138,000 approximately nurses leave the profession. So I think it really will require an all hands on deck approach from all of those stakeholders to really put in place proactive policies. So those could be formal and fully funded transition to practice. That could be addressing issues of workplace violence. That could be making sure that essentially nurses feel appropriately staffed and resourced to practice to the top of their license and education. I think that there's a whole multitude of solutions that need to be brought to bear to these issues, and there's really no one silver bullet.
Yeah. One last question for you. With mental health on the rise, as far as the problems with that, you think that will have to be implemented in the training more going forward?
Yeah, I think that this is why there's so many different stakeholders that need to have a hand in this. And I think education has a role in this. Thinking about how we train nurses to enter into the workforce and to prepare them for, potentially some of the hardships outside of just the direct patient care. I think that it's really going to take us rethinking the way that we've done things in the past and making sure that essentially we're setting the workforce to be as resilient and sustainable as possible moving into the future.
All right, Brendan Martin with Emory University, thank you so much for your insight and joining us for today. There's plenty of bills and proclamations which passed this past legislation session under the Gold Dome, but there was one in which lawmakers were able to sink their teeth into, literally. It was decided to make cornbread Georgia's official state bread. The bill's text recognized it as a singular stature in Georgia's history. Lawmakers also recognized the food history as indigenous and Native American people used cornbread to sustain themselves. Here with a little bit more fun on the With the state symbols is Claire Haley, Vice President of Special Projects at the Atlanta History Center. Claire, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Chesley.
All right, this seems a tad bit strange to me. Why do we have state symbols in the first place? Let's start there.
Well, first of all, I can think of no more appropriate state bread than cornbread, so I was very excited by this news. But to your question, why we have state symbols in the first place. So obviously we have our more storied state symbols, things like the flags and the seal, but then beyond that, we have all kinds of other things that have been named state symbols. There's really no rules around what kind of symbols we can have or not have, but really they're seen as a way to recognize the culture of the state, the things that bring us together, some tourism benefits as well to help us be known by something, and just as a way of acknowledging the impact that all of the different types of things that are made symbols have had on Georgia and its people.
So can it come from anyone, or does it just come from lawmakers, or do you have to, if you come up with an idea, you seek your lawmaker out and they pass it that way? Is that how it works?
Yeah, so this one in particular is passed by the state legislature. Some in the past were gubernatorial proclamations that were then passed as state, put into state law by the legislature. But the state symbols are actually codified in the Georgia Code. So since, going back to our lessons on the three branches of government, that comes from the legislature. So yeah, anyone who's watching who thinks that we need a new state symbol, definitely contact your state lawmaker and get the process rolling.
All right, so you said you couldn't think of another bread better than cornbread, right? What's the significance of elevating cornbread?
Yeah, well, better than cornbread is debatable because I'm also a biscuit lover. But looking at cornbread specifically, I mean, corn in particular, so important to the land that is now the United States. Mm-hmm. It's a native plant here, which is a bit unusual for some of our other foods, which came from elsewhere. We have records of corn being used to make cornmeal and into bread for thousands of years. Originally, most simply, just water and cornmeal combined to make food. But also more recently, things like buttermilk, even some flour and other things have been added into the mix as well. But we have a very long history of cornbread in some form or fashion from indigenous people all the way through to the current day.
Gotcha. All right. So I understand you have a quiz for me. I always fail on these things, but I understand you have a quiz for me about the symbols of Georgia.
I do, and I think you're going to ace it. So,
okay. All right.
We just picked 4 state symbols. There's a lot more than that, but we just decided 4 this morning.
Okay.
So the first one is, do you know the state nut?
The state's net?
Nut.
Oh, nut. Oh, it has to be a peanut.
Oh, okay. So this was kind of bad of us. We started with the trick question. It's actually the pecan or the pecan, depending on who you ask. So peanuts are actually the state crop, and are technically a legume, but not to be outdone. Our state nut is the pecan, named in 2021, actually.
Oh, so that was recent. No, was it the peanut before then?
No, it was the peanuts always, or not always, but the peanut was named the state crop in the 1990s.
Gotcha. So it can't be two different.
On our list for a little longer. All right.
Okay.
State bird.
State bird. Oh, thrasher. I know that. Thrasher.
Yes.
Yeah.
You got it. That one's an old one, picked in 1935 by a survey of 150,000 school children who decided that the thrasher was their favorite bird.
I only knew that because we had a hockey team here called the Thrashers, and that I was told when I first moved here that was the state bird. So that's how I know that.
Yes, absolutely. All right, next one, our official state flower.
I know this. It has to be like I know it's not just a rose, but it's a certain kind of rose or something like that.
Yeah, you're super close. It's the Cherokee rose.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Yeah, that one is also a very old one, named in 1916. Technically not a species that's native to Georgia, but has been well adopted across the state. Also a special connection to Atlanta History Center, the name of one of our archival collections, the Cherokee Garden Library, which celebrates 50 years next week.
So you're giving me credit for that one?
Yeah,
I got 2 of 3. Okay, we got one more, right?
Yeah.
2 of 3. All right.
No, you're doing
see if I can tie it.
We've just got one more.
Okay.
And there's a bonus point opportunity here.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you the state song, and then your bonus point opportunity is which version, like which recording of the song.
It has to be, well, it doesn't have to be, but I would say off the top of my head, Georgia by
Georgia on My Mind.
Georgia on My Mind by Ray Charles.
Yes,
yes, sir. Yes.
Of course, Georgia on My Mind, originally written by some folks from Indiana, but recorded by Ray Charles, and it was that specific version in 1979 that was recognized by the legislature as being the state song of Georgia.
Well, I didn't think would get any of these right. Wow. So, I mean, symbols, very important, obviously, and as you said, brings us together. I'm going to use some of these, Claire, in my next party or something, maybe win some money.
Yeah, there you go. And there's many, many more to choose from. So next time you're, bored and need something to do, check out that Georgia code and see what else you can find.
Real quick, do you know off the top of your head what's the most obscure, besides cornbread now to me, what's the most obscure symbol?
The most obscure state symbol?
Yeah, to you.
Oh, that's so hard. I don't know about the most obscure, but I would say my most delightful surprise was the state dog,
Ooh.
Which is the adopted dog, which I thought was just really, really sweet.
Nice. Very, very nice. All right, Claire Haley, thanks so much for joining us today and sharing that insight and educating us today. Really appreciate that. The City of Atlanta has put forward a proposed budget for the 2026 fiscal year. The $3 billion operating budget also includes a $975 million general fund budget. This aim is at boosting salaries and bringing upgrades to first responding agencies like APD and Atlanta Fire and Rescue. Atlanta's total budget for the 2025 fiscal year came in at $2.75 billion. This budget comes as the city faces a $20 million deficit. Mayor Andre Dickens says that the budget reflects those values and the steadfast commitment to strengthening our neighborhoods and strategic investment of our infrastructure. Let's get a further perspective on this now. Joining us now is Howard Shook, member of the Atlanta City Council and chair of the Finance and Executive Committee. Mr. Shook, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, give me your initial take on the budget for 2026.
So we've been told for a while now that because FY25 is probably going to finish that year in a deficit position, that has got a lot to do with informing what the administration wanted to present for the FY26 spending plan, a lot of which was put online just yesterday, and we'll get the budget book, the bound 4-inch thick document, Friday afternoon.
Wow. Talk to me about the public safety factor being stressed on this budget.
Well, it's going to be another growth year for police and for fire. That's public safety is just considered by so many people to be a paramount responsibility of all governments, big and small. We have been trying to grow our police force for many years now to get it up to the 2,000 authorized position level. That's been the goal for so many administrations, and which was only briefly attained some years back. Since then, the competition for police recruits has become a nationwide competition, a bidding war. And so, we either compete or you give up. And so we've been increasing their salaries and enhancing the pension plan, and those things are growing the force, which of course adds to the salary line. The good news is it's going to diminish over time, the overtime that they constantly get themselves in trouble over.
Mr. Howard, so many major events coming down the pike for the city of Atlanta, the biggest being next year's World Cup. Does the budget set up Atlanta to be successful with this big ticket item coming in without sinking future budgets?
Yeah, I hope so. I'm a warrior. So, I'm going to be praying, all the pipes stay where they're supposed to stay and all of that. I will say it's kind of a double-edged sword, the steady diet of mega sporting and entertainment events that we have. Because those are overtime generators for sure, and that's had a whole lot to do with the deficit we're running it for FY25.
Gotcha. Does the budget have anything in it that you wish may not have, that didn't make it?
I'll know more when I actually see it instead of just kind of looking at it from the 50,000 foot altitude. I can already tell that it takes the approach of kind of cutting everybody by more or less similar amounts. What I have always pined to see was let's start from scratch, zero-based budgeting approach. It's never been my belief that every program and activity that the city funds is equally as important as the one ahead of it or behind it in the alphabet.
Okay, so you have to continue to look over it. What are the next steps?
Okay, so we'll get the actual budget Friday afternoon. Monday's a full council meeting, and then Tuesday begins what will essentially be a month-long cavalcade of kind of every day, all day budget hearings where the Finance Committee will, have all the departments, each in its turn, troop in and explain its ask.
Mm-hmm. Do you expect to see a lot of haggling over it? Do you expect to a lot of back and forth going on?
Because in many ways, this is going to represent a slight contraction from prior years. Mm-hmm. There are going to be some of my colleagues, the newer members for whom this is their first term on council. They haven't been through this before, so it'll be interesting to see, how they balance their fiduciary responsibilities in a realistic context of a shrinking budget rather than, doing what they like to do, which is, of course, prioritize funding for the services and activities that they think are, very important.
Gotcha. All right. Howard Schutt with Atlanta City Council. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. Last week, Governor Kemp signed several bills into law addressing a third-party litigation financing and reducing insurance costs in Georgia. The Tort Reform package also works to reduce frivolous lawsuits by making it more difficult to obtain a trial by jury and limiting the amount of damages rewarded. Now, this is having lawyers having to change the way they operate. Joining us now on the take is Atlanta-based trial lawyer Kara Phillips. Kara, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Good morning to you. Give us your take on the governor's package, now a law.
Yeah, unfortunately, many Georgians lost their right to a civil trial last Monday, April 21st, as a result of this law, and the implications for the most vulnerable among us, children, the elderly, and all sexual assault survivors are really devastating.
All right. Well, a statement that Governor Kemp said that the tort reform package is targeted at what he calls the out of balance legal environment. Has that been out of alignment?
No, the jury system is one of the most amazing accomplishments that we have in our democracy. And to find 12 people who are able to reach an agreement unanimously about how someone has been injured and what their damages are is truly an important bedrock of our entire system and civil justice system. So no, there's been no out of balance at all.
So how will this change the way you operate in trial now?
Changes many things, and honestly, it's a lot of boring legal lawyer stuff, but things like whether or not a child victim or a sexual assault victim will have to testify twice during the course of a trial, or even 3 times because of bifurcation, whether or not lawyers can say things about the value of memories, non-economic damages, things that people lose when instead of being able to walk down an aisle for their wedding, they've got a traumatic brain injury and they can't experience those joys of life. Those are the things that this will ultimately hamper, that will ultimately not be accessible to people who are seeking civil justice.
Now, one of the backers of this was President Pro Tem of the State Senate, John F. Kennedy. Here's what he told us just ahead of the final passage of the package.
I would say the little guy and businesses and all of Georgians. If you think about how insurance works, claims are made against a policy that is then used to compensate people. When the cost of doing business in Georgia for any insurance continues to go up because of nuclear verdicts, because of insurance companies are scared to try cases in our court system because of the verdicts and the amounts that have been paid that are irrational related to what the harm or the injury is, they settle claims at a much higher rate. All that puts upward pressure on cost. And the question really is, who ultimately pays that?
Kara, talk about the nuclear verdicts that he's talking about in his comments there.
Sure. I'll give you an example of a nuclear verdict. My client's daughter was killed by a drunk driver, and instead of paying the policy limits of $25,000 to this grieving mother, the insurance company opted to fight her. And ultimately, we were able to get a judgment against not the insurance company, right? The insured, who wasn't the driver, but was the person who held the insurance policy for the car that he was driving, of $58 million. And that's because the life of this young 22-year-old was worth every penny of that. Mm-hmm. The problem with that and the nuclear verdict that resulted from that was entirely the insurance company's determination not to pay pennies on the dollar for the life of a beautiful young woman. And that is what the insurance companies do. The statements by Senator Kennedy talk about things that don't exist. The idea that insurance premiums rise as a result of litigation has been debunked time after time. The notion that Georgia is a judicial hellhole has been debunked time after time and was only propagated by insurance company and their behind the scenes PR campaign to try and convince Georgia citizens that this is an actual thing, while they just raised premiums because they could and invested the money and made billions.
All right, Atlanta-based trial lawyer Karen Phillips, thanks so much for joining us, and thank you so much for your insight this morning. So here's a question for you. What would you do if you opened up your mail and you found out you've been enrolled in a health care insurance plan that you never signed up for, one that could end up costing you thousands of dollars? That's exactly what happened to a Woodstock woman who turned to 11Alive News for help. 11Alive consumer investigative reporter Liza Lucas joins us now. And Liza, she thought she had everything covered under her insurance through work, and then she got this surprise letter. Talk to us about it.
Exactly, Chesley, and good morning. Crystal Bedford, she basically got a letter saying her health plan with Oscar Insurance was being renewed. But here's the thing, she'd never heard of Oscar and already had insurance through her job. Now that letter claimed it was an Affordable Care Act plan, which she'd signed up for, but she told 11Alive she never signed up for that policy.
Well, Eliza, could she just have canceled that policy?
Well, that's the obvious question. Of course, she did try. That was the first step in it. She tried everything, she said. She told me that she tried to reach out to the health insurance company, and she actually got confirmation that it was canceled. But then a few months later, we fast forward to January when those new insurance cards comes in the mail, and they did for the Oscar plan. And so she tried to cancel again. She appealed to the marketplace, the insurance commissioner. She was trying it all, Crystal tells me. And then tax season hit and the situation got even more complicated. Crystal learned that the federal government had paid nearly $10,000 in premium tax credits on her behalf, again, for this plan that she had never authorized.
The government had paid almost $10,000 in premiums for me, and my heart dropped. It said I was going to owe back $7,500, and I lost it.
You can imagine the panic you would feel if you suddenly owed $7,500 unexpectedly. So we're talking about major money on the line here. Crystal decided to reach out to 11Alive for some help. We reached out to the insurance company, and that's when she says the ball started rolling, and a supervisor contacted her. Together, they uncovered proof that her enrollment had indeed been fraudulent, Chesley.
So what about Crystal now? Does she still owe that money? Does she still owe the $7,500?
Well, I want to give you some perspective here about this too. I want to turn to some numbers on screen. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS, they've been cracking down on fraud since 2023. So this is not an isolated case. We're talking about between January and August of last year, the agency tracked more than 274,000 complaints related to ACA changes that were not authorized. The agency basically saying that the complaints have dropped since these changes were made to the marketplace. But Crystal hopes that sharing her story is going to show the other people that this is still very much happening. And I know you had a question about that money, Chesley.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of money. Of course, you put yourself in the situation, and wow, if you still owe that money, I mean, that's a lot to pay for something you never signed up for.
Again, $7,500. So I'm not going to reveal it all right here, but let's just say that she's very good at documentation. So there's a happy ending to this story, and hopefully viewers will watch and walk away with more awareness of what's happening in case they too have been impacted. And that's Crystal's hope for speaking up about this.
Absolutely. I would think that if I didn't sign my name or something, or if they don't have my correct information, how could they sign me up for something that I now owe for? Eliza, we're going to be watching your story. I'm definitely going to be watching that just to see if somebody has my name out there. It's a unique name, so, you know, I got to watch. Yeah, you hear that? That's the sound of Pickle Ball, the fastest growing sport in America. Yeah, it's causing some racket in some communities. Yeah, millions are picking up their paddles, but for some, the noise and the crowds are creating a real problem. Caitlin Ross takes us inside the clash between fun and frustration, and she's making the noise herself right there. Is it, Caitlin, really all about the noise that's causing the problem here?
It really is. It's just that constant tap, 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 and it's incessant. People who live near these courts say they never get a break. Pickleball is so popular, people are playing from sun up to sundown, and they say the peace that they formerly knew in their backyards is gone.
It is a loud sport. Does it have any impacts on property values?
The people who think that this is negatively impacting their property values say they have the data to back it up. They argue that homes that abut pickleball courts directly take a 20% hit in their property value. So that is huge for people who are looking to sell their homes in the next year or two. As these courts are being constructed, they're really worried about it.
Wow. So what do they want to happen? What are the neighbors saying they want to happen?
They want them out of their backyards. A lot of the people who we talk to say they're not against pickleball, they just don't want it happening in their backyards. They don't want to hear this sound from sunup to sundown. We talked to one guy who had a really strong argument about this.
Wow.
It's the sound of somebody re-roofing their house. It's the sound of two of your neighbors re-roofing their house from sunup to sundown. Pock, pock, pockety pock. The worst thing, what you miss when somebody's re-roofing their house is they don't scream when they hit a nail, and they don't scream when they hit a nail just right. That's what you get with pickleball.
And he says it is constant. He lives just behind those courts, but the funny part about John is he plays too. He says he loves playing pickleball, and the people who are arguing against this are not anti-pickleball. They're just anti-pickleball in their backyards.
Wow. So, I mean, it's becoming so popular. The guy you interviewed plays, is complaining about it. What are the people who enjoy it saying about these complaints?
A lot of them understand. They know that this is a loud sport, that it does cause a disruption. And so there's a number of different cities and towns that are trying to work out solutions. So in Tucker, Georgia, they're considering building these courts. And citizens are coming out en masse to protest them. They're actually considering a lawsuit against the city to try and stop the construction of these courts. In Summer Grove, it's an HOA community in Noonan. They already have those courts that are just 80 feet away from some homes.
Wow.
And they're planning on filing a lawsuit against their HOA to try to get them to move those courts. Some people have tried these noise canceling fences, but they have to be about 12 feet tall in the air to actually make a difference. And then other places like Avondale Estates are forcing people to play with these soft balls and noise canceling paddles. So people are really looking for solutions, but I gotta tell you, they have been really hard to come by.
Wow. Are there any long-term solutions, or did you just mention a few of those?
So Peachtree City is actually looking at a really expensive long-term solution. They're looking to move the pickleball courts altogether. They have had such strenuous opposition to these courts being in people's backyards that they're saying, all right, we're just going to move them. They're going to move them to a place that's away from homes. People will have to drive to get to those courts, but the folks who live near them say it's really worth it to have it out of their backyards.
Wow. Or maybe even go inside, right? Maybe inside facilities.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah. I mean, I play tennis. I haven't played pickleball yet. Although I'm getting up there in age and people saying, hey man, you need to move to pickleball. Have you played yet?
I have played pickleball, and to be honest, my in-laws absolutely kick my butt in pickleball. They are really good at it. So, it's really fun, but it is loud, it's noisy.
Are you trying to say it's a seniors sport?
So it started out that way. It did start out that way, but now it's actually the fastest growing sport in the United States. That's how many people are picking up a paddle. The data we have shows 13.6 million people in the US are playing. So this is a sport popular with all age groups.
All right, you convinced me. Sign me up. Sign me up. Maybe easier on my knees.
There you go.
See. All right, Caitlin, thanks so much for your report. Really appreciate it. This summer travel season is right around the corner. Good news for flyers. Plane tickets are starting to get a little bit cheaper. The Consumer Price Index this month shows airline fares have fallen about 5% from this time last year. It will now cost you about $253 on average, but what's good for us may not be a good sign for the airlines and the industry as a whole. Joining me now is Bill McGee. He's the Senior Fellow for the Aviation at America Economy of Liberties Project. Welcome to the show, Bill.
Thanks very much, Chesley. Happy to be here.
When we start to hear these prices going down, is that a good sign? Is that a good signal for us?
It's good for us. It's good for consumers, no question. But if you're an airline executive in a C-suite right now, you're probably not too happy.
Oh, wow.
But there's been this sort of perfect storm, a confluence of events in the last couple of months that have completely turned around the airline's fortunes.
What contributes to that drop?
Well, a lot of it has to do with the new administration, quite frankly. The effect of the tariffs is having a very chilling effect on the industry. Don't forget, many of the aircraft that U.S. airlines use are by Airbus in Europe, and so the tariffs are hitting them pretty strongly on that. Delta, in fact, has said it won't accept delivery of certain aircraft because of the tariffs. And then you have just, the overall economic uncertainty. And that is really, what we've seen over the years is that in many ways, air travel is sort of a bellwether of the overall economy. Going back many, many decades, a lot of economists who have nothing to do with aviation or airlines will look at airline stock and say, uh-oh, there's an early sign, sort of, canary in the coal mine type of thing,
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're seeing now. In January, just before Inauguration Day, all of the U.S. airlines reported their 2024 earnings, and all the big ones did very, very well. Some of them had record earnings. Now, 3 months later, we just finished the first quarter, and all of them, without exception, have downwardly changed their projections for 2025. That's just in 3 months.
Wow. So how is all the uncertainty that you're talking about, how is it impacting them? Is that the pull on the price, or is it seems like it would up the price, right, if they're having trouble as far as making money, right?
Yeah, it's a sort of classic supply and demand thing. They have been chilled by the fact that bookings have fallen off. And so when that happens, it's often good news for those that do want to travel. And I should point out, timing has a lot to do with this also. As a general rule in the United States, if schools are out during the holidays, during Thanksgiving, during the summer, obviously, fares tend to go up. And there's, a lot more families traveling for obvious reasons. May and September, October, those are what the industry calls the shoulder seasons. If you're able to get away then, I know it's already May, but if you're able to get away, you'll do even better probably than you will during the summer. So that's one thing to look at.
What is your advice for people who know that they're going to be getting away? I know that typically airlines will offer a certain price deduction on fares for a certain point of time. So do you have to get in early? Obviously, the earlier the better.
Yeah, for every the problem with shopping for airfares, Chesley, is for every rule there's a counter rule. But as a general rule, yeah, the earlier the better. Particularly since this summer, there's going to be restraints on capacity. We have problems we don't have enough air traffic controllers in this country, and particularly in the New York region where it's become critical. At Newark Airport, there have been delays every day this week. Now you may say, well, I'm in Atlanta, I'm in Los Angeles, that's not going to affect me. It's all part of a bigger puzzle, So the fact is that does affect you. So my own personal advice is I would book. If you see a fare that you like, take it, because it may not be there later on.
You mentioned air traffic controllers. I did see a report yesterday that they need thousands. Yes. What have they been doing to try to beef that up?
Well, there are some new efforts that the new administration has put in place to try and attract more air traffic controllers. But there's sort of some counter messages as well. Due to DOGE, there were some layoffs, not in the towers with the controllers themselves, but with the support staff for air traffic control. And that's a really, really bad idea. Can't stress that enough. And also, of course, the DEI pipeline was bringing in new folks to air traffic control and to other government functions. And by shutting that down, I think long-term that's going to hurt us. Wow. You're not going to have the same, amount of attraction for people that may not have thought about a career in aviation.
Yeah. Bill McGee, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your insight. All right, have a good day. Yeah. All right, to get some more perspective on how these prices might impact the summer travel season, we spoke with a luxury travel advisor. She says summer travel has been sort of a wait and see kind of game this year. More people are booking things at the last minute, but ticket prices are a big factor, so a drop in prices could make an impact.
It's something that for our clients, we have them look at before we even start the planning process. If they come to us and they say, this is my dream destination, the first question, and we start talking about budget, the first question is, have you looked at flights? How do those fit into your budget? And sometimes flights can eat away the entire budget so that the experience is not feasible.
All right, so the big question of the morning is, will ticket prices go back up? Will they stay down? Well, of course, nobody can tell the future, but Allison says, well, she does offer some advice for us.
I think everyone always wants to talk about that. And I do get clients a lot of times like, I heard if you book on Tuesday, and, if I wish that was true, I would only book on Tuesdays. But what I have read is that United and Delta are already dropping some of their routes for the fall. And so what that's going to do again is they're going to decrease their supply. Our demand may stay flat, but with the supply going down, the prices will definitely go back up. So I think if you see a great deal, grab it. Most airlines are really flexible. So if your dates don't work, you can change it.
Wow, I thought the Tuesday, through Thursday thing was real. She's saying it's not. Wow. So if you find a good deal, folks, you better jump on it because those prices will be fluctuating. So hopefully if you got some summer travel, which most of us do, go ahead and try to book as early as you can. All right, before we go, my final take, there's an online debate probably should be put to rest, okay, by now. This is the question. Could 100 men take one gorilla and win? Take them on. Well, this reminds me of those hypothetical debates that we would have back in the barbershop when I was younger. We didn't have an internet to debate the question, of course, like it's running wild on the internet now. And we even debated that in the newsroom, and most people said no way the men would win. Well, I thought differently. In fact, I think 20 men could take a gorilla. We've been domesticating animals for centuries now with less men, right? Plus, at some point, the gorilla has to get tired, right? It has incredible strength, but not incredible stamina. Right? Still, most disagree with me. Now, the experts have weighed in and said, yeah, one gorilla could certainly beat one man, but the sheer number of men would certainly be at the gorilla's disadvantage. Look, we're not trying to make this something real. It's a fun debate. We're not advocating going out and fighting gorillas. Don't do it. They're gentle giants, unless they're severely provoked, all right? Let's move on to the next debate, like, will the Falcons win the Super Bowl next year? Well, that's probably already been decided as well. That's all the time we have for you today, folks. Make it a great day, and make sure you encourage someone, and don't go fighting gorillas, okay?